Here with Nick Mastrovito today. Nick was a colonel in the Army. He spent about 30 years in total, got 20 active years out of that. Nick's here today to talk a little bit about his transition, his service, his family service, also to talk a little bit about how to help other veterans transition and a little bit about what he does today. So I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit more clearly, Nick. I appreciate your time here.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks for inviting me to this podcast. I'm pretty excited about it. I'd like to start out with my family. I grew up in a military family. Both of my grandfathers served in the Italian Army. My paternal grandfather actually fought in World War I, was a prisoner of war. My maternal grandfather was too young for World War I, but served in the Italian Army as a commando, a bersagliere. My father immigrated to the United States in 1949, joined the Army and fought in the Korean War. And then he went on to have 2 tours in Vietnam and retired after 30 years as a command sergeant major in the Army. My brother joined the Army as a National Guardsman in the Oklahoma National Guard while he was at Oklahoma State University, served 22 years to include a tour in Afghanistan. My sister went to the Air Force Academy. She was commissioned in the Air Force, worked as a maintenance officer, and her significant accomplishments were to work on the B-2 bomber project as well as the C-9 JSTARS project. Her oldest son is an Air Force Academy graduate. He's a major in the Air Force currently and is an instructor pilot. So I have a couple of people in my family that were in the military. I graduated.
Just a couple.
I graduated from West Point, commissioned into the Army. Interesting enough, my first assignment was with my brother in the same infantry battalion. From there, I went Special Forces, served in the first Gulf War, and then left active duty. Eventually, I came back as a reservist, was a battalion commander, was a brigade commander, served in Iraq in 2008, and then finally retired. And so that's kind of the history of the Mastrovito clan as it is. And my wife's father-in-law, my father-in-law was also in the military, retired as a colonel, had a couple of tours in Vietnam. So I've been surrounded by a lot of military veterans. And it's always amazing when I run into a group of people that none were veterans, none have any veterans in their family. And so it's only a recent time that I've seen that, but I think that actually says something about service. And one of the things that I'm most proudest of my service is, the fact that I learned a lot in the military. I learned a lot from my father, and so the military reinforced those types of things. But it's interesting that sometimes I'm in groups of people that have no idea what the military is like, and they think that we're all crazy, we all served in combat, and we need a handout, and that's not really true. I think that what military people do best is leadership. When I talk to transitioning veterans, a lot of times they may not have an engineering degree or have a degree that's actually usable in the real world. And I hate to say it that way, but if you have a degree in history, that's great. If you want to be a history professor or be a journalist or something like that, that's perfect. If you want to go into corporate world and work as an engineer, I'm sorry, that history degree is not really going to help you much. But what you do have is that ability to lead people, that ability to plan, organize, get things done. And I think that's one of the critical things that people coming out of the military have that perhaps is not exploited as much as it possibly could be.
And I think like many other skills that we have and just the experiences that we have as veterans, usually we're pretty humble. And I think it's difficult for us to talk about our accomplishments, and it can be difficult for us to articulate what we're good at and how we could have some advantages over the average civilian.
Absolutely, absolutely. As a today as a recruiter, I do run into veterans all the time. I can't always place them, and veteran recruiting is not part of my normal practice. Although I'm willing to help any veteran out. Obviously, I've been through transition twice, and I can tell you that the military does not do a good job at transitioning people into the civilian world. And one of the critical reasons for that is the people that are doing the transitioning services have never been, most of them have never been in the real world. So they don't know what that corporation is looking for. And so they're talking from very generic points of view versus, hey, I spent 10 years in industry and this is what industry is looking for. And so if you are not highlighting those things on your resume, or if you're not looking in that particular area, you're you're going to be dead on arrival.
Yeah, when you say that the instructors in the transition program have never been in the real world, could you elaborate on that a little bit more? And I think you've told me about this, but just want to get a little more insight into that.
Sure. So from what I've seen, and I've seen this a couple of times. As a matter of fact, when I first left the military, when I left active duty, I was in Germany, and I went to transition assistance. That was 1,000 years ago, and unfortunately,
Yeah.
transition assistant hasn't changed much in those 1,000 years since I first left the military. But I asked the guy, I said, "Well, what have you done? What's your expertise?" And he said, "Well, I was in the Army. I think he was a retired staff sergeant in the Army, and then he got this job." And I said, "So
Went straight from the military to transitioning
right,"
for the military.
exactly. And I'm like, "So what do you know about working in corporate America?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know anything about working in corporate America." Later on, I did a short stint with Veterans Affairs, and I was at Fort Lee, Virginia, and I was part of the transitioning team. But my role was VA benefits. It wasn't how do you write a resume, how to present yourself, what to what color is your parachute is a great book to read on
Hmm.
what do I want to do next. And so but I
I'm gonna
got
read
to,
that. That sounds good.
yeah, I got to observe, and this is probably in 2013, actually, it was 2015. I got to observe what transitioning TAP is doing for our transitioning military right now. And it had not changed much since I had done that 1,000 years ago. And the people that were presenting, here's what you need to do to get a job on the outside, really didn't have any expertise because they had been in the military. They're now government civilians. And so when did they actually work for corporate America to say, hey, here's what corporate America is looking for? And I think that's a crime that unfortunately a lot of our transitioning servicemen think, okay, well, you know I've got a degree from American Military University in history or counterterrorism, but I don't want to work in counterterrorism. I want to work over here as a quality inspector or something like that. Well, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. So instead of telling them our servicemen, hey, get a degree in underwater basket weaving, and then you will become the CEO of a multinational corporation, we should be realistic and say, hey, figure out what you want to do next and start working
Yeah.
with that right now. And I'm not saying for one second, I was an infantry and special forces officer. When I told my father that I was leaving the military, that I was resigning from active duty, he said, well, what are you going to be, a cop? And I said, oh, no, are you crazy? Cops get shot at a lot more than special forces guys get shot at. I don't want to do that.
That's right.
I have an engineering degree. I used my engineering degree to get my first job outside of the military. But again, when you're in the military, you should start thinking about, hey, I'm not going to be here for the next 50 years. I'm going to be here perhaps 20 or 30 years. What do I want to do once I leave? And that should start formulating, well, if I want to get a degree or I want to get another degree, what should I get a degree in? Or if I want to learn a trade, if I want to be a cybersecurity person, start learning cyber, start getting the tools, but then try to find an assignment that will put you and give you some of that cybersecurity experience as well, versus coming out, you've been a career infantry officer or a career special forces NCO, and now I have a degree in cybersecurity, but I have zero experience.
Yeah, and that's the key, is it's the foundation. I think the whole conversation should be about what's next and what do I want to do, what's my purpose. Those things don't seem to be talked about enough, and it just gets glossed over. It just goes right into the practical. This is how you put a resume together. This is how you interview for a job. This is how you apply for a job. But that first conversation, that I think there needs to be probably a day or a week of just deep concentration, focus into who am I in this world? What do I think I want to do? What are all the things that are important to me? And now we can make decisions about all of that stuff. Make better decisions about career, better decisions about, like you said, the college that you're going to go to because you might need it to pursue that career. And everything in life is going to be different based on those decisions that you make. So these are big decisions.
Right, absolutely. And then the other thing is, I'm 60 years old. I'm still not sure what I want to do when I grow up, and so that's also an important thing that a transitioning serviceman needs to understand. Serviceman, servicewoman needs to understand is, hey, the first thing you do may not be the last thing you do, and so I want to take a step back real quick. I left the
Sure.
military in 1996. I found a military headhunter and I went to work for Merck as a manufacturing supervisor, got promoted a couple of times, left, and then went to Georgia Pacific and did kind of the same career at Georgia Pacific for a couple of years. And then I took a turn and I became a financial advisor. I did that for about 10 years, started my own company, left that company.
Fun job.
I'm sorry.
It's a fun job.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting. I love investments. I love helping people. I left because I got tired of taking people's money and then they not. I present them a plan, a financial plan, and they take no action. There's just a. I guess there's a security of, well, my financial planner said that I'm going to be okay, but no action taken. And so I then started a nonprofit with my wife, and then went back to industry, worked for a few years, and then I bought a recruiting franchise, and also started my own recruiting company. And so my point there is, you have skills. If you were in the military, you have skills. Don't put yourself in a box and saying, I can only do this. There are plenty of things you can do, to include being a small business owner. I think buying a franchise for a transitioning military person is also a great thing, because you have the ability, you understand leadership, you understand how to do things, how to get things done. And so buying a franchise is something that you're actually capable of doing. You spent your entire time in the military learning how to be a small business owner. So it's a great place to go. It's scary. I'm not going to argue that. I'm saying the first time I started my first company, I was scared to death. I was like, what am I doing? And am I going to be successful? And sometimes you're successful and sometimes you're not successful. But transitioning military people have have skills that the rest of the world does not have. A lot of those skills are intangibles, but they have great skills. They've been through a lot. They've done a lot of stuff, and they can use that learning and that experience working in a different environment. Absolutely working in a
For
different
sure.
environment. It's just a matter of, can you articulate that? Can you convince somebody that, hey, I just need a chance to prove what I can do for you? And I also have examples working in industry where, the only reason I was there was because I had some leadership skills. And I remember my first boss telling me, well, you spent 10 years in the Army, 11 years in the Army. You were an officer, you led soldiers in combat, you've done all these leadership things. I graduated from college and I got put in a leadership role, and I have no leadership training at all. And so, you're way advanced on the leadership skill than I am, but I'm your boss. So teach me. And
Yeah,
that's something, and again, that's something that we can do in industry is teach our bosses how to be great leaders.
that's true. I want to take a step back real quick here because you mentioned that you started a business as a financial planner, financial advisor. That's obviously my industry now, and something I enjoy. But I totally agree with you. I think that you can build a plan and things don't get implemented, and there's a lot of challenges with that. Helping somebody put something together, and you give them the step by step process, and they don't necessarily take advantage of it, and they pay for that. It's really unfortunate when that happens. And then you transition to becoming a recruiter, and now you have your own business. You have a franchise in recruiting. Do you think some of the experiences that you took as a financial advisor have kind of seeped into your recruiting process?
I do. The idea of failure is always there, and so there were things that I learned with my financial planning company. There were things I learned with our nonprofit that I then could say, okay, well, those things really didn't work. So why would I think they're going to work now? Or, hey, here are some things that worked very well, and I should integrate them into my current companies. I have two companies. I've got a franchise and I've got another recruiting company as well. And and so yes, there was learning there that I've carried forward. And you know a lot of businesses fail, a lot of business owners fail, but the ones that really fail are the ones that quit. So if you're willing to fail but then get up and start over again, then you're not a failure, because hopefully you will have learned from that first failure, build on that first failure, and then figure out how to not have failed. And I only say that because uh, leaving my financial planning company was a difficult transition. I was trying to do financial planning while I'm running this nonprofit, and something had to give. And what gave was my financial planning company. And so in the end, it doesn't exist anymore because I closed up shop. Had I been had I been tremendously successful, I could have probably still done both. My financial planning business would have would have kept going, and it didn't. So in essence, my financial planning company did fail, and I learned a lot from that failure. That again, the only people that are real failures are the ones that quit. The ones that go, okay, yeah, that didn't work out exactly the way I was hoping it to, um, but I was able to use that to build something better later on. And now I'm very secure in my financial or in my recruiting practice. It wasn't easy, but after about 3 years, I kind of figured it out. And so, now I don't worry about, well, am I going to fail? Now, if we have another 2020, yeah, would I be worried? Yes, I would. 2020 was a difficult year for recruiters, but I survived, which is beautiful. And now I'm pretty successful. I'm happy with my success. And again, I do also attribute that, I can attribute it back to the military with the sense of, we can't afford to fail. Failure is not an option. And so I use that mentality with everything that I do, that, hey, there's sometimes things are going to be ugly. Sometimes things are not going to work out exactly as planned. But I'm used to that because in the military, the minute you cross the LDLC, your whole plan goes out the window, and now you're now you're not hoping, but you're working with your knowledge and experience to make the plan that went out the window work in some other fashion.
You mentioned a couple things there. You said that you had a nonprofit as well. While you were working on the financial planning firm, what was the nonprofit?
We started it was a mentoring program for women with a group home. So our idea was that we would find women who wanted to better themselves. We would bring them into our group home. We would do mentoring, coaching, counseling, and help them get to the next step. The idea was it would be a 2-year program. At the end of 2 years, they would be able to go out into the world and be successful on their own. We assumed that most of our clients would come from people living in public housing, very impoverished, living off of government assistance, and so our goal was to get them to the next level, get them away from public housing, get them off government assistance if we could, and get them into whether they completed like a 2-year college, or get them into a stable work environment where they had those skills. Interesting enough, none of our clients came from that demographic. They all came from prison. So we brought women out of prison, out of jail, and interesting enough, all of them had children that they were not raising because they were in jail. So they're, in most cases, their grandparents, their parents were raising the grandkids. Most of them were drug addicts, and so they had this period where they would be in prison, they would get out, they would get clean, get out of prison, and then they would stumble back, and it was just like a vicious cycle, continuous cycle. And so we would bring them in. We would, they were clean because they had been in jail, even though every single one the judge would ask, "Are you, can you pass a urinalysis right now?" Found that interesting. They're in a county jail, should be able to pass a urinalysis. Why wouldn't they? But that's not necessarily true. We did drug test them on a regular basis. We did a lot of mentoring. We helped them get jobs. We wanted them to have part-time jobs because we wanted them to be able to do other things beyond just working. We had actually had several that started college, and then we also wanted to help them reestablish their relationships with their kids and with their families. And so we would have family events where the kids would show up. We had a lot of women mentors that would mentor our clients. My wife was a counselor, so she would do a lot of counseling to try to figure out, hey, how did you get here? So that, how do you stop from staying in this type of scenario? And very fulfilling. Probably the greatest thing that I've ever done. And my role was part administration. I also taught some classes, but it was probably the greatest thrill of my life. I did a lot of cool things in the military, but nothing compared to running. It was called the Grace House of Tennessee. Nothing could compare to that experience. It was a phenomenal experience.
That's a very noble experience. It sounds like a very important mission that you were working on, and I think it's another perfect example of You're never going to really know what you want to be when you grow up. You just go where the journey takes you, and you help where help is needed. You solve problems that need to be solved as you go, and you just stay open to those different possibilities. Otherwise, I think life is kind of boring.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
And again, you go and do things and do the best you can and, try to move the ball, one step further rather than rather than having this idea that, well, everybody owes me something. No, nobody owes you anything. Sorry. And I don't care what you did in the military. No one owes you anything. You have the ability, you have the knowledge, you have the experience to go and do things. Go out there and do things and do them to the best of your ability. And if you don't like what you're doing, change. Find a way to change. Find a way to change what you're doing so that you can enjoy life rather than not enjoy life.
when you're out of the military, you have the opportunity to change. It's not as easy when you're in, but I
Absolutely.
think that's one of the biggest lessons I got was, man, sometimes this life just sucks. But when you get out of it, and you're out of the military, then you have the ability to create whatever you want, and
Absolutely.
that's a super powerful thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you've got the skills, you've got the ability, you've done it, you've seen yourself do it. So it the whole world is your oyster. You can do whatever it is that
Yeah.
you want to do. And you have an advantage over those that didn't serve because you did stuff in the military that nobody else was willing to do. And so now you have that. Now you have the ability, the confidence to go out and do great things, in in whatever sector you want to be in.
Well, I think that's a really good closing point. I had one more question for you, Nick. You've given a lot of really good advice in this conversation, a lot of things that you've learned along the way. What's what's next for you?
Well, someday I'm going to retire, although I don't. My sister is talking about retiring. My brother still works for the government, and he every once in a while he'll say, "Hey, I've got 648 days and 32 minutes, until I can retire." And I keep thinking, well, I'll retire when I die. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I want to continue to be successful as a small business owner. I'm not really sure what my hobby is my work. I do enjoy my work, although there are many days and many weeks where I go, I just want to sit on the couch and read a good book and not worry about anything else. So I don't know what's next for me. I'm pretty happy where my company is right now. I'm also the COO of a small defense company. We've struggled for the past 5 years. We've been this close to a $400 million 5 year contract, and then something happens. I would like to see that be successful someday. I just don't know what that will look like. So who knows?
Well, that's an interesting. I would say that would be something that maybe we could talk about again in the future as you get a little bit more clarity about that particular company. And very interesting. You've got a lot of great stories to tell, Nick, and I really appreciate you giving me the time today.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I love the idea, and I hope that this can help. If it can help one veteran, we've been successful.
I think it will. I think it will because at the very least, we get to put this out there, and hopefully it inspires somebody else to come on the show and have their conversation. The more we have these conversations, I think the more it helps one way or another.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So awesome. Well, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
You too.